Hello out there on YouTube and Facebook on Friday afternoon. It's Leah at my sewing room here on a Fan Mail Friday. Um, I have something that's been brewing for Friday episode for a little while, and today's the day. We're gonna talk through something um, that I know some people never ever think about when they're working on things um, for other people. So if you do not want your significant other in your life to know how much your hobby costs, tell them to not watch today's video. Today's video is we're going off the beaten charts as far as what we do here on our channel. Today I'd like to talk to you guys about how to go about figuring out how to charge for something. I know lots of times once we get going into a cool hobby like sewing, making quilts, people come up to you and say, "Oh, will you make me a quilt? Will you make me a quilt?" We're going to talk quilts today. This is probably a multi-part series with other things, but we're going to talk quilts today because that's a place where a lot of our customers already have some experience, and definitely something where the moment somebody learns you can make a quilt, there's interest in, can you make me a quilt? How much would it be? How do you charge for that? So I'm going to go through some of the things I would do for pricing out something. If somebody asks you to make something, they're like, "Oh, I'll pay you for it. I'll pay you for it." Because there's many ways of doing that, and it depends where you're in this for. If you're feeling the hurt of gas prices and you'd like to actually not just lose money making this for somebody else, there's some things to think about. If you'd like to be earning a bit of income doing what you're doing, let's talk about that. So that is where we're headed today. It's going to be a lot of numbers on screen. I will try and keep it practical and sensible in mind. But definitely if you're just in this for the joy of quilting, and you just love to make quilts, you don't care what it takes money-wise, don't watch. Today's a day to tune out if you don't want the cold hard reality of numbers. That's my disclaimer for today's video. A little bit odd, but if people have ever asked you for how much it would take to make said quilt, let's get into that and do some simple numbers. We're not going to go way too deep, but things to think about as you go. So first things first. I'm going to go through examples today based on quite a simple quilt pattern. One of my favorite go-to patterns for kind of a quick, easy sew is called Yellow Brick Road by Atkinson Designs. The yardage requirements on it are relatively easy to follow. You can decide to do it with borders or without. I don't like putting borders on quilts, so I drop that part when I make quilts if I can. So this would be relatively quick, simple sew out, which is also something we're going to have to keep in mind as we're figuring out how to charge for our time and energy going into a handmade product. So something with maybe slightly more work and slightly more time intensive, maybe not a whole lot more time intensive, but just different, something kind of middle of the road. And very different story if you've got somebody looking for a really extensive quilt like a Eureka. So very different game plan as to how much you're going to charge as you move up in complexity on your quilt. So you should join me on this wild math journey. We're going to start from a fresh spreadsheet. I don't have a template to send out to you on this, but I'd like you, if you're going to start thinking about this, these are some of the categories that you're going to need to keep in mind for as you build the cost of your projects out to people. So without further ado, I will try and I only have one tab, so I might miss questions. I'll get back to them later for you. So I think if I go, not window. I didn't set that up as window. Set that up as screen. Oh, I can still see my YouTube comments. Make that full screen. If you guys have a Google account, this is my first hot tip of the day. If you have a Google account, you have access to something called Google Sheets, which is where I do most of my things. I've mentioned before in other videos, I have a spreadsheet on my phone to keep track of all the isocord thread colors that I own. I do that in Google Sheets. So my isocord thread chart, this is a side topic, sorry. Embroidery, color number, color name is how I set up my chart. And then I have a note if I've bought a 5,000 meter spool. That's less related to what we're doing today. Let's make ourselves a chart for figuring out our project. So in reference, first things to think about in the big picture of your project will be how much fabric. That is the easiest variable in figuring out the cost of your project to do. I'm just going to change the view on this so you guys can see a little better what I'm up to. Let's go big. It's giant on my screen, but that's okay. So the cost of goods will be the easiest part of the math to figure out for how to charge for your project. So I would say project name, size, maybe client. Who are you making this for? Auntie, who are you making this for? You might want details in there. That's up to you. Requirements for fabric. Call this whatever you want. But this is the first tangible thing that we can start adding into our list. And we're going to use, let's go back to this for just a moment. This is on close up. So yellow brick road pattern. If somebody asked me to make a twin size quilt, I need 18 fat quarters and 2 3/8 yards border and binding and 5.5 yards of fabric. So those are the numbers I'm going to input and the places I'm going to input them. We'll make some lines for that on our chart. Nope. That's where that screen went. So back quarters. So I said twin. Yellow brick road. Nope, we'll call this fabric placement, quantity, and really, if you're not good with something like Excel, totally welcome to do this by hand. But my writing is terrible, and I didn't think you guys would like to see my chicken scratch as we worked through this today. Cost per unit. So for each part of our quilt, we're going to go through and give this either a rough estimate based on average cost of fabric, or we're going to go through and put in very exact numbers if we already know exact numbers. But there's things to keep in mind as we get going on this that sometimes we forget about in the mix. So like I said, this is a pretty straightforward little quilt, and we need 18, oh no, blocks. 18 fat quarters. And fat quarters translates to about 1/4 of a meter. Lots of fat quarters are around $5 a meter. Or $5 per fat quarter. So we might want one more column in there. We want 18 fat quarters, which is not the same as 18 meters. So that's okay. we'll do it that way. It'll be okay. Blocks, we have borders and binding. This needs 2.2 3/8 yards. 2 3/8. Really, for most things in this type of situation, I would round up slightly, so 2.5 meters, 2.5 yards. I like to round up a little bit to give myself grace and space to cut things neatly. That makes me happier. Say cost per meter on the fabric you pick in there is somewhere around $21, $22. If you round up to the nearest whole dollar above whatever that sticker price on your fabric that you pick is, you'll be a little bit happier. We also need backing. And backing on this says 5.5 yards. So we're in Canada, so let's use meters. And same thing. Our backing cost is probably going to be similar to our borders and binding. So maybe our unit cost here should be 5.25. So the fun thing about things like Excel is there's lots of great formulas you can use. If you press an equal sign in there and do brackets, we can say the quantity, and asterisk is your multiplication symbol, and times that by your unit cost. So 18 fat quarters times about $5.25 a quarter will give you cost for area. And we can do, there's a funky little option to scroll down on formulas so they will extend down through your project. I am not an Excel teacher. Not going to claim to have that skill, but I do know the things that I use all the time. Sums are one of them, multiplication is another. So do this by hand if it makes more sense to you, but we're going quantity times our cost per unit, or cost per quantity, to get the cost for that part of the quilt. You probably also need batting for your quilt. And maybe you need packaged twin batting. I'm going to call that $30, which is too high, but I don't feel like figuring out the exact cost of a piece of batting right now. We could look that up on the website, but you could look this up before coming in. Depends what kind of batting you're after. And we could scroll that down. So many of us, when we start looking at the cost of a quilt, this is as far as we get. You figure out how much the fabric is and you stop, which if you just love doing the sewing and just having somebody cover the fabric cost is enough for you, this is what you could say is a rough outline. For a twin size yellow brick road, my fabric cost is going to be roughly, we're actually going to go cell E8. And I'm going to go E12 because there's one more thing that's not in here that you will definitely use. So rough fabric cost for a twin size quilt with rough estimates on the cost of fabric and batting right now, you're looking at about $300. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, can you make a quilt for my dog's best friend's owner's uncle's wife? I'll pay you for the fabric. They probably should pay about $300 for this particular quilt in this particular kind of setup. So the things you have not yet considered, you have not accounted for thread on this quilt. At this point, it looks like you're sewing it together with air. I don't know about you, but in my opinion, thread is not free. So let's throw a spool of thread on there. Maybe you need 2 spools, and they are $9 each. So that brings your cost up just a little bit. If somebody's offering to pay for your fabric, I highly suggest that they get in there and also cover the cost of thread for that particular project. bare bones, bare minimum, if somebody's coming to you and saying, hey, can you make a twin size quilt? This is roughly where you're looking for cost on this project. This at this point only covers your costs on making this project. You have not covered any of your time, wear and tear on your equipment, or any extra supplies you may need to complete this project. So those are the more ethereal costs when you're trying to price out handmade goods that people can't see when they look at a quilt hanging in Walmart for $30. They don't see that workmanship, they don't see the expertise, they don't see the time and effort you guys have put into building the skills you have. So anybody can drywall your house for the cost of materials, but if you want somebody to drywall your house beautifully and have nicely taped seams and smooth level walls and your junction boxes out of the drywall, you might need to pay somebody with some skill, and that skill doesn't come overnight for free. It takes years of practice to hone your craft. It takes some equipment like a sewing machine and an iron and your cutting mats and all those things that you invest in to make your time sewing more efficient. So other things to include in here that are much more ethereal. This is just rough time. The cost of your labor is the next easy one to figure out. So cost of labor. We can go back through and figure out how much time this is all going to take you. On something pretty straightforward like a yellow brick road, I would make a test block all by itself, see how long it takes to make one single block, and then multiply that by the number of blocks needed for the quilt. Lots of times you can make your time more efficient by chain piecing. Batch sewing things is more efficient than making one. This is why factories operate so efficiently. They make the same thing in repetition over and over while you're set up to do that one thing. Way more efficient. So I'm gonna scrap that out of there. Section. You can break this down however much you want, but in the mix, nope, we're not going to start with cutting. We're going to start with shopping for fabric. Did you have to go spend an hour picking fabric? Prep. Would this be ironing, starching? What are you doing to prep your fabric? You might also want to think about cutting for blocks, sewing for blocks, ironing for blocks. How much time do all of those things take? Break this up however you want for your math, but keep in mind that if you do an estimate on the first block, you will be more efficient after the first one because you'll know how it goes together. And you'll know if you want to make a whole bunch of these for somebody else. Maybe each block is going to take you an hour and a half and they're asking for a quilt with 27 super complicated blocks. Maybe that's not a quilt you're willing to spend time to sell, because at the end of it, you're not going to make any money on your time. You're just going to do it for the cost of materials and the joy of making it. Totally acceptable. Sewing borders. Quilting. That could be sandwiching, quilting, squaring up, and binding. So in here, you get to decide if these things are something you're charging for. And really, if you're sewing on a commission basis, all of your time should be accounted for, and you should be aware of this. Shopping for fabric. Maybe it only took you 5 minutes online, but then up in here, you should probably account for some postage if you're ordering this online. when you quote this out. So don't get stuck paying for shipping on a quilt that somebody else is paying for the fabric for. If they can't pick fabric local that you can go pick up easily, it's going to be more, obviously. Prepping and ironing. Maybe this is only half an hour. I'm pretty efficient at cutting blocks. Yellow Brick Road has pretty easy cutting instructions, maybe an hour. And sewing the blocks, I'm going to say 3. And maybe ironing for those blocks, maybe it's only half an hour, or I mush those 2 in together and decide it's all one chunk of time, because you have to press, sew and press and sew and press until you're done. Are you like me and it takes forever to put borders on because you're very careful and you pin along the way and make sure they're stretched properly? Maybe this is another hour. Maybe sandwiching and quilting. Depends how you're quilting this. Are you free motion quilting at a 1/4 inch spacing and doing super detailed quilting work? That's going to be way more time intensive than quick run with a meander stitch on your with your walking foot. So maybe we're at 3 hours because you want to put some extra love into it, and you like some more detailed quilting in there. That's okay. You can make that decision as you make this project. Squaring up and binding. That'll have to include making your binding, attaching your binding front and back. Are you doing that by hand? Are you doing machine binding? This is up to you. Here in store, we have a binding service, and we charge, I believe it's 30 cents an inch for binding, and that's hand sewn onto the back. So keep that in mind. Maybe that's a 2-hour project for you because you're going to machine bind. It's not so bad. So we're going to do a quick total of this section. And that's going to be from B17 to B24. So we're looking at maybe 12 hours for the quilt. So definitely doable in a weekend. But the factor that you need to keep in mind, hourly rate that you would like to earn. It's a super big thing to keep in mind. Are you willing to do your creative work for below minimum wage? Do you need this to actually help pay some bills? Do you need this to offset the cost of gas of going to the store? Do you decide, like, my time is always worth $25 an hour? You're a creative person. Artists, as creatives, we tend to undervalue our work, which is totally unreasonable. It takes you years to hone your craft and build your skills. Don't undervalue your creative work. It is magical. And if you want to give away your time because, you know, it's somebody you love, that's totally cool. Give away your time, because that's something we can give as creative people, is give away our time and our energy and our love. But if somebody's coming to you and saying, can you make this for me? I will pay you. What would you like to get paid for that time? What would make that just that little bit sweeter for you? Personally, I like to set this around the $25 an hour. I might not track my time to the limit, but if I've done a quick estimate and I can tell whoever is buying this from me that I'm going to charge you $25 an hour for my time, I think it's going to be roughly 12 hours to do this. We'll go our total number of hours times our hourly rate. And I'm going to say my labor charge for you is roughly $300. I'm just going to make that bold for a moment. So labor charge. This is a cost for you. This is your time and energy, your efforts. That is labor. One more section of things to think about. Cost of doing business. Again, No hard, fast rules in here, but things to think about. If you are sewing consistently for business throughout the year, electricity. Ironing isn't free. Um, Service on your machine. Wear and tear items in your sewing room. So wear and tear items in your sewing room. This would be rotary blades, needles. Needles need to get accounted for somewhere. Those things. Consumables that you'll have to replace when you use them up. Similar, rotary blades last a little bit longer. Cutting mats might be in your... Cutting mats would be in this one. Consumables. This might be things like starch. I like starch. That's my friend. What else might you need? Do you need lighting? Do you have to pay for lighting in your room? All of these things. Some of these, you get to figure out what this might be. But maybe in the mix of this, you know you need a new rotary blade and a new needle for every project, and you're going to use a little bit of starch, and you need to account for some of the wear and tear on your sewing machine. Maybe this is just a round figure for you of my extras around the house and room is just the wear and tear on your house, all of those things. Maybe this is $25. You know you need a couple needles, you know you need a new rotary blade, you know you're going to use some starch. Maybe that's all you build that charge out to be. And that's a little, like if you dive down into the math, you can start figuring out how much each of those would be. Is a needle $2 a needle? Is it $1 a needle? If I buy a 10-pack of rotary blades, can that make more sense? So kind of making sense. I'm going to zoom out for just a moment. I'm going to make this bold. So in these bold areas, we've got about 320 in supplies, including our thread. Labor charge, if you decide to charge 25 an hour, we're maybe looking at another 300. And extra costs just of doing business in your sewing room to keep your supplies up to date and current, to make sure you have functional tools in your room. Maybe this is 25. Kind of making sense. If you need a specialty ruler to do the project, that would be built into the cost somewhere in here. You have to buy a tool to do the job. Do you need a specific template? Do you need a specific ruler to do the project that you've been asked to do? Yellow brick road, not so much. Pretty straightforward and simple. But these are the bigger things that we don't always think about. So your time is valuable. As an artist, your time is valuable. There's a reason art sells for millions of dollars. We don't need to sell our quilts for below our cost if you're trying to earn a living doing this. It is entirely possible to figure out the math in a way that you can earn some money and actually make some income doing this. Highly recommend going through a proper business setup. So you're charging tax when you get to be a big enough business and not just do everything cash under the table. Something, maybe you need invoicing software. That would be a cost of doing business. I don't know. That's depends how deep you're going into this little puzzle. So total, if I was to charge this out today and somebody said, How much is this quilt going to cost me? I'm going to go back through those 3 areas in here. Maybe 644. 645. Call it 700. Round up. Give yourself some wiggle room. Maybe 700. Bigger queen size quilts. I quoted out for made the quilt as a gift for my father. But somebody else asked, what would you charge to do this? Oh, one more thing we didn't have in there. This might be long arm quilting charge. This might be per square inch. So something to think about there. Are you going to pay somebody else to quilt this in there? That needs to be built into your final labor charge. So that is that's my brief overview of things to think about if you want to charge for your creative projects. I'm going to flip back and see if I can see any comments. And see if that will... Oh, you guys have some good questions in here. What about copyright if you use a pattern? Let me see if I can change this box over so I can read that whole comment. Generally, most quilt pattern copyright is fine to sell 1 or 2 of that quilt. What they're trying to avoid with copyright on patterns usually is some mass market production where you're making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those quilts. So generally, personal use, you're making it 1 time, selling it 1 or 2 times. If it's going to be something that you want to sell at a market more extensively, say you want to make ornaments at Christmas and sell hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Christmas ornaments, those times, contact the designer. Whole different conversation with embroidery, but lots of people like to sell embroidered ornaments. There is copyright limits on some ornaments. Some are like free to use for as much as you want, make as many ornaments as you want. Others have a limit of like 25. There's other things in the mix. If you happen to own a Disney branded Brother machine with the Disney embroidery, you're not actually supposed to sell any of those Brother Disney designs on anything finished. You can give them away to your heart's content, but you're not supposed to sell them. So reading the copyright rules is not fun, but checking with designers is definitely the right answer if you want to make way more than 1. You buy the quilt, you make the pattern, you're not copywriting, you're not sharing the pattern, you're sharing a finished good. So a little bit different. Oh, good comment in there. Charge if they want fabric pre-washed. Like all those things, all those little steps. All things to consider. I don't have a hard fast rule for you. If you are totally content to just get your fabric costs covered so you can keep sewing more affordably, that's awesome. I've definitely sewn where friends of mine came in, picked all the fabric for a gift for a wedding for their brother, longtime family friends. I went through this math with her. We came up with a number that kind of made sense, where I earned a little bit of money. I didn't want to charge crazy amounts on that particular quilt because I was going to this wedding too, and got to like help hand off the gift. It was like from his sister and a friend. So keep those things in mind as you're figuring out if you're gonna sell some of your stuff, because people like handmade things. They're gorgeous, they're fabulous, and they're super unique. So treasure that uniqueness that you provide to your craft as you carry on out into the world. And if I made it scary to quilt, then don't look at the numbers. Lots of good commentary. Get the customer to purchase a pattern, then the designer gets paid too. Yeah, yeah, definitely more than one way to get there. If the customer wants to be able to make the pattern themselves, they definitely need their own copy. So the designer gets paid appropriately. That is my rough math with Leah this afternoon. um, yeah, that's what I got for you. If you guys are looking at that and saying, maybe I should turn this into a money-making venture and you have more questions, come see us in the store. We can definitely get some of those answered for you. We'll do another one of these with how I would price for embroidery because it's a little bit different than how I'd price for a quilt. Lots of the same parameters, but depends. It changes a fair bit because there's different variables in embroidery than in quilting. So big overall picture is the same. Cost of supplies, cost of labor, cost of like existing as a thing that can sell things. So we'll talk about that in another couple weeks about how to price embroidery to sell and make some money because I don't know, gas prices are high. Earning some money while we have fun sewing is good for all of us. And one last word of advice on that note. If you quote fabric and you're doing the buying and you happen to find fabric on sale one time and this is going to be a regular customer that you're working with, don't set the bar too low. Just because you were able to get fabric at half price for this particular project doesn't mean that you'll always get fabric at half price. So the end customer should know that you normally this type of fabric would be $22 a meter. Great news, I happen to get some secondhand clearance bin for $11 a meter, so I'm able to drop the price for you. That's cool. But let them know that this is not something that is always there. Yeah, it's not always $11 a meter. So let them know what the normal cost is. If you're willing to pass on the savings that you got because you had a cool coupon, like a birthday coupon at the store, you can choose to pass along those savings or not. Depends what that relationship is with your end customer on your quilt project. So it also depends if they're standing in the store buying the fabric. If they're bringing their debit card through when you're buying the fabric, that's a little less risk on you. I would take deposits. Don't expect to get paid at the end for all that time and energy. Take deposits up front. If you think it's going to be a $700 project, take a 50% deposit. So you've got cash in your bank account to cover your upfront costs of making that project. That's my word of advice. And then there's commitment to get it done. If you know you're not efficient, say, hey, can you at least get me $100 to cover the first bit of fabric? Yeah, that's math with Leah on a Friday afternoon. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. Thank you for joining me today. There's some new fun stuff back there, but I'm gonna save that for next. No, you guys have watched enough math. There's some new stuff coming in next week. One of our orders of all new things. I think Chelsea's gonna do an unboxing on Monday. No, maybe she's not. I don't know. We have lots of boxes of new things. They're in receiving. They'll be coming out next week. So stay tuned next week because there's some cool stuff coming out. Have a lovely evening. Have a lovely weekend. Feel free to shoot us questions if you want to know more. I don't have it down to a science, but I've thought a lot of steps through to make it smoother and easier. So if you liked today's video and you know somebody that's sewing for a living or trying to sew for a living or just trying to sell their things, send them their way, share this video, tag us, comment, like, share, all those good things. Hit the notification bell so you see more. There will be another part 2 of pricing your handmade goods. We're talking embroidery specifically.